According to the New York Times, in the early morning hours of June 17th, at the Democratic National Headquarters in the Watergate office building in Washington, there had occurred what the White House had then dismissed as a third-rate burglary. And just 2 years later, it had led to Mr. Nixon's forced resignation. None of the 7 senators on the committee, and certainly not the Senate itself, when it formed the committee, began his work with the intention of getting Richard Nixon. And yet they did much to get him, because the force of the evidence led them continually higher in the administration hierarchy until Senator Howard Baker from Tennessee was asking the same question of the witness after witness. How much did the president know? And when did he know it? In the courts, attorneys and even legal scholars may often refer to that which they describe as a legal term of art, which may be a word or even phrase that connotes a very specific meaning under the law. Legalese, lawyer shop talk, nuanced meanings for which only members of that exclusive club claim to profess the full comprehension, which is why you retain their services when you go to court. And on July 28, 2023, one of those very special phrases, one that appears now in only 13 cases in the entire federal judiciary history, had been used in an off-the-radar case with absolutely no coverage in the press, despite possessing a court-acknowledged protracted history. And despite the presence of rather high-profile defendants, including the world's largest social media platform and the White House. According to the court, in a matter only now on appeal, 2 years after the action had been commenced, a matter described in pleadings by the White House as nothing more than an unadorned, the defendant unlawfully harmed me accusation that is ripe for dismissal. As to Webb's FOIA claim, the complaint comes closer to making the grade, alleging that on March 23, 2023, petitioner had a FOIA request regarding a request seeking to determine whether the standard metrics of secondary attack rate and or infectious dose were classified information. And the White House did and continues to refuse to reply in any manner to the request, asserting a presumptive claim of executive privilege. A very refined word phrase in the law, a legal term of art. If a case even mentions classified information, even if not making headline news in the press, this is already a matter involving national security, which Executive Order 12958 describes as the national defense or foreign relations of the United States. By definition, this is a matter of accountability and openness in the highest echelons of government. If the defendant is the White House, it is not hyperbole to suggest that this case is potentially an unprecedented scandal at the highest levels of government, for most of the defendants had held major positions in the administration. And yet, for unarticulated reasons, this story about what had occurred after, by email of March 23, 2021, OMB had acknowledged receipt of this request and assigned it tracking number 21-220, remains a story hidden in the depths of shadow and darkness, despite being a matter brought to the courts under the Freedom of Information Act, under which, on complaint, the District Court of the United States in the district has jurisdiction to enjoin the agency from withholding agency records and to order the production of any agency records improperly withheld from the complaint. According to the White House, in attested pleading to the federal district court in the nation's capital, The office had broadly construed the request as seeking all records pertaining to any determination that either the infectious dose or secondary attack rate of COVID-19 or its corresponding virus SARS-CoV-2 had warranted a classification at the confidential level. And this is a designation that shall be applied to information the unauthorized disclosure of which reasonably could be expected to cause damage to national security. That the original classification authority, a person designated by the president or the president himself, is able to identify or describe at the time. If an agency is able to render a near immediate determination to initiate the process of assigning a personnel security classification information, one would reasonably believe that a request to have the White House confirm or deny whether specific information, in this case just two basic epidemiological metrics for assessment of transmissibility risk, had been classified information, should be accomplished with minimal efforts. And those who have presented for the request should have, within just 20 days, in accordance with the law, received a decision to inform them that the information they had sought had been exempted from disclosure under Exemption 1 because it was classified. Should be familiar that generally that ends the inquiry. Generally, agencies are bound to follow their own rules, even self-imposed rules that limit otherwise discretionary decisions, while even the Army must abide by its own regulations, even if it is more rigorous than necessary. However, by email of March 23, 2021, OMB had acknowledged receipt of this request and assigned it tracking number 21220. And then the situation had changed. The most famous sentence Howard Baker ever uttered was his immortal line about Watergate. What did the president know? And when did he know it? With respect to OMB FOIA number 21-220, distinct from the document request submitted by the press on a fishing expedition to cherry-pick documents to present Dr. Fauci in a more favorable light, this investigation at issue was attempting to gather information about an extensive conspiracy, including the identification of the members of the upper echelons of that conspiracy and its sources of supply. Where an investigation is focused largely on blueprinting the shape of the conspiratorial wheel and identifying the spokes radiating from it and its hub, the need to allow latitude to eavesdroppers is close to its deal. Large and sophisticated conspiracies may justify considerably more interception than would a single criminal episode. And yet, contemporaneously with this request in March 2021, for at most 2 documents, 866 pages of Fauci's emails have been obtained by the Washington Post as part of the Freedom of Information Act request, described as opening a window to Fauci's world during some of the most frantic days of the crisis. More than 3,200 pages of emails obtained through the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit filed by BuzzFeed News, covering the period from January to June 2020, and provided a rare glimpse into how Fauci approached his job during the biggest health crisis of the last century, showing him dealing directly with the public, health officials, reporters, and even celebrities. The documents from these requests from the press had been released just 2 months before the approval of the COVID-19 countermeasures, and 5 months before the CDC had made the determination, although not reported in the press, that the novel virus was in fact a chimeric virus. A chimeric virus, which can, by definition, only be the product of a lab. These requests for documents by representatives of the press had occurred over a year after the HHS secretary had described the public health emergency as a CBRN agent or agents presenting a heightened risk not of infection, but rather attack against citizens residing abroad and members of the uniformed military forces. The only conditions under which an emergency use authorization can be issued under Section 564 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act. Courts determining when the statute of limitations begins to accrue in cases of fraudulent concealment have recognized at least 2 types of fraudulent behavior tolling a statutory period. In the first type, the most common, the fraud goes undiscovered even though the defendant, after commission of the wrong, does nothing to conceal it, and the plaintiff has diligently inquired into its circumstances. In the second type, however, the fraud goes undiscovered because the defendant has taken positive steps after commission of the fraud to keep it concealed. Conduct conforming to this pattern constitutes aiding and abetting, and defendants can be charged as principals for such criminal conduct. And of course, prior to questioning, the person must be warned that he has a right to remain silent, and that any statement he does make may be used as evidence against him, and that he has a right to the presence of an attorney, either retained or appointed. However, evidence of flight is admissible even if offered solely to prove his consciousness of guilt as to that predicate act. Furthermore, once conspiracy has been established, the government need show only slight evidence that a particular person was a member of the conspiracy. And while a defendant is presumed to continue his involvement in a conspiracy unless he makes a substantial affirmative showing of withdrawal, abandonment, or defeat of the conspiratorial purpose, mere cessation of activity in furtherance of the conspiracy is not sufficient to show withdrawal. The most famous sentence Howard Baker ever uttered was his immortal line about Watergate. What did the president know? And when did he know it? This message was approved by Major Mike Webb. Honest.